And now, without further delay, let's begin today's event, sponsored by Onfido and hosted by American Banker. I'd like to introduce your moderator, and that is Mike Sisk. Mike, you have the floor.
Thanks very much, Adam, and I would like to welcome the audience once again. We are very grateful that you've chosen to share some of your busy day with us. We know that your time is valuable, and we will honor that today with what I'm confident will be an engaging 60 minutes or so of discussion. Once again, our topic today is creating digital trust, anchoring remote users to real identities. And my name is Mike Sisk. I will be your moderator today. I am a contributing editor at American Banker, and my articles have also appeared in Barron's, Crane's New York Business, Inc., Institutional Investor, Strategy and Business, and Worth. And I am very, very pleased to introduce our two speakers today. Robert Humphrey is CMO at Onfido. Robert brings more than 35 years of experience in sales and marketing, with expertise ranging in market strategy, demand generation, and brand awareness. Robert is recognized for his inspirational leadership and ability to develop compelling go-to-market strategies and tactics that help companies drive awareness and demand. He has a proven track record in helping lead growth-oriented companies of all sizes. Robert comes to Onfido after having served as CMO of ForgeRock, and we're very, very pleased to have Robert here with us today. And joining him is Mickey Martin. Mickey is Director Global Architects at Onfido. Mickey is an expert in identity access management, identity proofing, and effective customer registration processes. He's built extensive experience in the identity space, previously working at ForgeRock, Oracle, and Transmit Security. Mickey now works on Onfido's principal sales engineer, working as Onfido's principal sales engineer, helping the company to understand how identity verification and identity access management can solve business-critical problems for their clients. And also very, very pleased to have Mickey joining us here today. And just before we jump into the real meat of the discussion, I wanted to reiterate two quick points that Adam mentioned, and that is we do have time at the end for Q&A. Usually we set aside about 10 or 15 minutes, and you can put your question into the queue throughout the hour as it occurs to you. You do not have to wait until the end, so we encourage you to get those questions into the queue, and we'll make every effort to get to everyone's questions. But often we don't get to everyone's questions. Sometimes we just run out of time. Sometimes it's just a question that's better answered one-on-one afterward. But in any event, if we don't get to a question you've asked, we will follow up after the program, so please ask away. We very much want to hear from you. And we also have a couple polls today, and I always encourage 100% participation. We do share the results live here with everyone, and it's a really good way for other folks, for everyone to see where other folks stand on the issue we've come together to discuss. So if you could weigh in on those polls, that would be most excellent. And I think that brings me to the end of my little opening speech. I will be back to help out with those polls in a few minutes, but right now I'd like to turn things over to Robert to get the ball rolling. Robert, the floor is yours.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. It's Mike's introduction. It sounds like I'm the commercial. I sound like the sales guy, so I'll try not to be a little bit. I will say that the real meat of the content today is going to be when Mickey takes you through, so how does this stuff actually work? Let me tell you a little bit about Onfido. We're not as a recognized brand as we might like to be, but we're a company that's been in business 7 years, a little dated on the slide, over $200 million in funding with a recent funding by TPG. Both Salesforce and Microsoft Ventures are backers of the company. We're doing 1,500 clients globally and doing identity checks in 195 different countries, over 5,000 documents that we can, and Mickey will take you through all that we recognize, and just a strong organization that was founded by basically three guys out of Oxford University. Our first actually investment was by Oxford University. It was the seed money that started Onfido. We saw a real problem in the world of how are we identified, how are we confirmed and verified as to who we are in trying to access both online and offline services. So we'll get into that a little bit more about how we actually do that. So it's, I see this slide and says the new normal for financial services. I think we're all probably sick of the term the new normal, given what we're going through today. There is no normal, I think, right now. No normal in financial services or no normal in any industry. But what's obvious is our users are more remote, matter of fact, completely remote than they ever were before. And with that creates a whole additional expectation around how that experience is, how they interact with our digital services, as in everything is now digital. They're used to their experience on their phones. They're used to how they interact with Apple and Google. It's simple, it's intuitive, etc. And so that becomes even more critical as our users are 100% remote. Also, with this remoteness, the knowing your customers matters more than ever. No longer do they come in to your branch, to your office, to your whatever, where we can verify and identify them. And so how that is done and knowing them is both an issue of engaging them as part of your customers, and it's also a regulatory issue, obviously, particularly in financial services. And then in all this stuff, costs, manual costs are a risk. Manual costs in terms of how do we, in this case, how do we verify who the person is, who they say they are. Doing that manually is both time-consuming and costly. So what we suggest is you turn that challenge, those issues, into opportunities. If you're able to build that online user experience that converts the people that are considering your offering to actually becoming customers, that thinking that digital-first mentality that embraces everything being remote is a key, and we're going to show you how we think some best in market ways to do that. Leveraging machine learning and technology and capabilities that Mickey will talk about to satisfy your customers at scale. This is a biggie again, as we talked about, both from just knowing your customers from a business perspective, but also from a regulatory perspective. How do you do this and prevent fraud and meet regulatory requirements at scale? And you can't do this manually. To be able to do this approach, you got to swap out clunky manual processes that you may or may not have in place today for digital processes that automate this. And we believe that is done through anchoring your digital accounts in real identity. And Mickey will talk more what we mean by real identity, but a little hint, it simply means, as opposed to data and bits and bytes and numbers, anchor them in things that are real identities, things like documents and faces, biometrics. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Mike real quick, who's going to take you through a few polls. These polling questions we really do want you to participate with. This will also help influence the presentation information sharing going forward. So Mike, back to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert. And yes, everyone, so we're going to have 3 polls in a row here. We'll move through them pretty quickly, but as Robert said, would really appreciate your participation here, because we'll be able to shape the discussion going forward a little bit based on how you guys react. So first question is, do you currently use a biometric verification of any sort besides simple iPhone or Android unlocking with face or finger? And the choices are facial recognition, behavioral biometrics, more than one of the above, or none. To complete that question, do you currently use biometric verification of any sort besides simple iPhone or Android unlocking with a or finger? All right. I think that's probably enough time. Let me go ahead. I'll just show the results here. And so pretty clear, almost 2/3 of you do not use them, and more than one of the above. So thank you very much for those results. And next question here, what's the average cost of an identity on the dark web, such as credit card, name, social security number, birth date? $200, $4, $45, or $2,000? Your best guess, I suppose, with what's the average cost of an identity on the dark web? $45 or $2,000? Okay, that's probably enough time on that one too. So let's go ahead and share results. And here we've got a little more things sort of spread around here. So a leader here. 34.8% of you said $45. Another third of you, about third, said $4. And just $10,000. So interesting. Those results are looks like we have a fair amount of variety of thoughts on this one. Thank you for that. And last question is, what's the most critical factor for you verifying a user? Is it speed, fraud prevention, security, or compliance? Third and final of these polls, what's the most critical factor for you in verifying a user? Fraud prevention, compliance. All right, let me go ahead and share results here. And okay, definitive results on this one. 76.5% said fraud prevention, and everybody else was playing security 11.8, and then compliance each got 5.9%. So thank you very much for all of those results for these three polls. And I will now turn it over to Mickey to run us through the next part of the program here. Mickey, the floor is yours.
Hey, guys. Thank you guys for joining today. I hope everyone is hearing me because I'm unmuting myself and that I'm coming across loud and clear. But I do want to note that if anybody has an issue with that, just throw it up in the chat or let me know, especially one of the moderators, if I start coming across breaking up. I have terrible cell phone reception. But, let's go back to those poll questions and talk about those for just a quick second. It seems like, especially on the first one, we were actually getting a lot of honest response where 2/3 came across and said they're not doing the types of biometrics that we talked about. Now, I will qualify that by saying what we put on the list there because there might be some other ones that we left off. But, it's one of the trends that we noticed that when a lot of companies start talking about biometric authentication, they kind of really mean that they did Face ID or Touch ID, or I forget what Android calls theirs. Forgive me for that one. The second one and the third one are really, kind of what we're here to talk about and what are we actually protecting. So the average cost of an identity, and this is information, that we pulled off of a third party, and I think there are kind of two answers just depending on how deep you go into that identity. But the average answer that we came up with from that third party was $4. It was $4 to buy an identity off the dark web, which is kind of sad if you think about it. Now, if you go out there and really think about it, that's how much damaging your credit, or someone stealing your identity. You can open up a credit card and charge a lot of money, or taking loans out. That's how much it's worth. It's $4. So we got to come up with the best way to protect that. Since it is so cheap, it's very easy for most people to get a hold of those things. And then, that most critical factor, obviously, the most critical factor when you're doing identity verification is, of course, fraud. I mean, that's the whole reason we put in any of the measures, or a lot of the measures that companies put in when it comes to dealing with end users. We're trying to protect them. A lot of times our end users, they don't really realize that we're trying to protect them. They kind of see it as, I got to do one more thing. But at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. You as a company are trying to protect them. Now, maybe some of the reasons you're trying to protect them is for making sure that you don't get caught with some regulation or making sure you don't get fined. But at the end of the day, we really do care about the end users. We really do not want bad things to happen to them. We don't want our users to have to fight for months at a time to go fix something that happened with their identity and be part of that equation, because that leaves a bad taste in their mouth. So I'm not surprised, especially on that most critical factor. But I will say that I do slightly disagree with everyone on the phone, because we do know that the most critical factor is fraud. But because we're dealing with end users, not a lot of people on this phone will put something in place that isn't fast and very easy for users to use, because even though we're trying to protect them, we still have to convince them that everything is easy, and we still have to convince them that it's fun to go through the process and not deter them in any way by making it more difficult. So I think that's a hard one to balance. But if we're all being honest here, if it's not fast and frictionless, or it's not seamless to the user, we have a hard time convincing the business side to put in all the things that we think are important for that fraud and security pieces. But so we'll get to all of that a little bit later, and how we at Onfido will map to each one of those, especially the speed and the fraud and security. And I think compliance is kind of an easier one, because you got to do IDV, which I believe most of the people on this call here, you're familiar with the KYC requirements and stuff. So that's an easy one to talk about, but we'll talk about the other three in great detail on this call, if you will. So, the why. I always like to start everything out. What is Onfido doing, and why does everybody on this call care? So at Onfido, we're anchoring accounts in real identities, and that's a fancy way to say that we're helping our customers with creating digital identities for their end users, and we want to make sure that those digital identities are always anchored to a real person on the on the other end of the computer, if you will, or the other end of the phone app. And how we're doing that is by taking two things that users have, users pretty much have with them at all times, and that's a government ID and their face, a biometric. The two things that we're really doing here, if you think about it, I came from an identity background, so I'll keep throwing identity terms in there. A government ID, if I have some of the more technical people on the call, those are kind of like open ID tokens. They're kind of like SAML assertions. That's an identity assertion that someone has put out there, someone that you trust has put out there. You hopefully trust because they come from your government. And that biometric, what's that really about? That's that proof of ownership, So at Onfido, the two things that we're focusing on is collecting that information and we're verifying it. So, we're going out there, we're convincing users to take a picture of their government ID. We're convincing them that they need to take a picture of their face. And on the back end, what we're doing is we're verifying that identity assertion that supposedly came from that government entity is real. We're validating that they haven't done, anything fraudulent or suspect with this government ID. And I will have to say, this is a blanket statement. I'll break my character to say this. We support 4,500 documents in 195 countries worldwide, but due to me being an American, I tend to accidentally say driver's license a lot because as an American, we use our driver's license way more than we ever use our passports or, visas or work permits or things like that, national ID cards. So please forgive me if throughout the presentation I slip up and just keep saying driver's license instead of government ID. It's just keep it in your mind, 195 countries, 4,500 different documents. What we do is we take that driver's license, I'll go ahead and say it, or that passport, and we check to make sure nobody's tried to manipulate it. Nobody's tried to, pull the wool over your eyes and change anything on it. And after verifying, we also want to make sure that the person who gave us that actually owns that government ID before I tell you that it is valid and before I tell you that you can trust the information that's coming off of it so that when you create that digital account that it's anchored to a real person. Let's just double check to make sure the person owns it. So I have one more real fun game. This isn't going to be a poll like the other one. This is going to be a quick thought process for you guys when it comes to verifying identity. So the whole idea of this game here is I want you guys to imagine that you're the bouncer at the bar and somebody's handed you a government ID and you got to validate whether or not you're going to let them in the bar. I like to say bar, but if we can imagine, someone walks up to a teller at a bank, if we're allowed to do that, depending on the state that you're in right now, depending on, your COVID restrictions and lockdown. If a person walks up to a teller at a bank and says, I don't have my bank routing number. I don't have my bank account number. Can I get access to my account? We tend to ask for people's ID. So pretend you're in that situation, and you got to pick one of these. Which one of these is the real one? I'm not going to pause near as long as we were on the polls earlier, but everybody take a good look at it. Think of one in your mind. 3, 2, 1, boom. So now you can see which ones are fake, and we're kind of pointing out exactly what was fake in here. So as you can tell, this tends to be very difficult. And for the longest time, this kind of was identity verification. We joke about it because we still see it at the bars, but, when you're buying alcohol at a bar, that's low risk, Low risk, not worried about the failure rate as much. But when you're trying to get money out of a bank account, or in some states or in some places, you have to show your photo ID to vote or to register to vote. I know that changes from state to state, but you can tell that, for a long time, that was identity verification. Someone walked up and you showed this to a person, and that person was, just because they happened to be that person that day, was now expected to be an expert on what fraudulent IDs look like. Most of us, we know how to pick 2 or 3 things out. You know, hey, is the hologram there? Hey, does it look weird in any sort of way? But we don't know all of the nuances in all of these things. And that's kind of where the IDV space started, or the next generation identity verification, which is where Onfido is at, versus the credit check databases or the credit record databases that we went. That's kind of where these companies popped up and said, you know what? The only way you're really going to do this at scale, and the only way you're really going to do this accurate enough, is if you start involving things like machine learning and AI, something that you can teach to approach 100% accuracy, something that you can always rely on historical data and historical knowledge of all the driver's license that they've seen, and something that can see driver's license or passports in the millions and not in, like most of us at a bar, you know, a few thousand maybe. And AI can see a few million very easily. So the next part of it, of course, is that, you know, that's figuring out the driver's license part. That's the fun part. But we also have to double check and make sure that the person who submitted that to us owns it. Because what if I just stole someone's driver's license and decided to open up a bank account? Well, without that protection, without that biometrics piece being tied to it, you're not really certain that they own that particular driver's license, or did they find it on the side of the road, or did, you know, we can be even more devious. Maybe they got a friend at the DMV who printed up a copy and handed it to them, you know, somebody else's. All kinds of different ways to get a hold of someone else's driver's license and use them. Maybe you left it at a bar, and the bar person just happened to a friend of mine in the UK, left it at a bar. Bar person actually opened up a bank account because they took a picture of his ID. You know, they didn't have that facial part. So, you know, adding in that facial part, that proof of ownership of this identity assertion becomes very important as well. Those two together are what's going to help you stop those fraudulent users as much as possible. So one thing that I would love to tell you about Onfido here is that when we come to facial biometrics, and, you know, keep in mind this is comparing the biometric that we're taking. Maybe it's a selfie, maybe it's a video, you know, active liveness with a video or passive liveness with multiple selfie captures. And we're comparing that to the picture that's on the government ID. With Onfido, we actually have a 0.01% false acceptance rate across all the nationalities. So if you guys reach out to us at a later date and we have a more direct conversation, you know, I can go into more detail on this and actually show you this matrix that we use to make sure that we keep this low. But you want to repeat that fact. When we are trying to make sure that a person who submitted a driver's license or a passport owns that driver's license or passport, we have a 0.01% false acceptance rate. So we're pretty certain, you know, really, really certain that that person owns that document. And then we turn around and we're really certain that that document is valid, which in turn gives you guys, the banks, a degree of certainty that, you know what, this is a real person who's about to open this bank account, or this is a real person who's about to tie that bank account that they opened when they went into the brick and mortar stores to the person who's trying to get a digital identity so they can log in and check their balance from the application, from the phone apps, if you will. So I know we kind of talked about this anecdotally, but we're going to talk about it directly. You know, where does IDV kind of fit in the user lifecycle, right? So I'm sure everybody on this phone is familiar to some extent or another with the identity lifecycle of a user. You know, you have a user register, you have them log in, they're going to forget their password, they're going to do some transactions, and then they're going to edit their account in some type of way. And that can, you know, I hate to say it, it's the negative part, but I'll go ahead and mention it because we all got to prepare for it. You know, they might eventually close their account and you have to prepare for that as well. Another thing that I'll say, I'll break character for a second with forgotten password. Being you know, in SciAm and IAM for the last 10 years, I know we're always trying to get rid of passwords. I will still keep saying passwords just because it's in my vocabulary and I tend to default to it. But when we talk about this later on, you know, please note I will be talking about a lot more than just passwords. We'll be talking about a lot of different strong authentication around that. You know, what happens when you forgot your strong authentication or you broke your device. So don't get discouraged or think that I'm old-fashioned because I bring up password. It's just an easy thing for us all to relate to because at the end of the day, there's usually a password somewhere. We've all interacted with at least a password where we might not have interacted with something fancy like YubiKeys. So, if we think about this identity lifecycle management, this is, the first point when we're trying to secure, when we're trying to keep our end users safe, and we're trying to keep ourselves, or, yourselves, safe from bad actors. The first point, of course, of interaction is registration. Whether that be because they went into, the actual bank, or whether or not because they went to an app and said they want to sign up for a bank account, that's always the first interaction with the customer. That's the first point where they have, looked at a lot of your marketing. They've looked at your commercials. They've looked at the things that you allow them to look at without having to register, and they've made that decision in their mind that, they're going to commit. They want a bank account from you guys, or they want a loan from you guys, or, et cetera, mutual funds, et cetera. They want a deeper relationship with you. Well, if we start and introduce identity verification at the beginning when an account is created, it becomes a lot easier to filter that security through the rest of this identity lifecycle, all the things that a user and all the things that, you want users to do inside of your system. It becomes a lot easier to filter that security on through. Kind of like the, the old story, if you build your house on sand, it's harder to keep it up. It's the same thing with an identity. If you build an identity on something strong, it's easier to protect it later on. So if we introduce that at registration, and what do I mean by introducing that at registration? I mean, right when a user says, I want an account, what if all you had to do is you just ask them to say, what's your email address, and, sorry for saying this, pick a password. What's your email address and pick a password? And that's all they had to type in. And the next step was identity verification. So in this case, you can see the pictures on the screen here. You'd ask them for a picture of their driver's license, passport, government ID. You'd ask them for a picture of their passport. You'd ask them for a picture of their face. And what can you return to them immediately? What would identity verification, what would Onfido be able to help you return to them immediately, so that to the user, we might be adding a little friction because they got to take a picture of their driver's license, but we're trying to remove that friction. And that's kind of where, those identity attributes come up. We have data extraction and what we call autofill. You get the attributes off of that document, off that government ID, so that you can use that to autofill the form where you're normally asking the users to start typing things in. Why does that reduce friction? Well, if you got web, it might be easy to type in your address. Myself, when I'm on an app, I find it very annoying to type in my address. Well, if you had identity verification and they took a picture of their driver's license, they wouldn't have to do that anymore. All that would be filled out for them. But what's the business value behind that? You're going to have strong security. You're validating that it's a true assertion. You're validating that it's a real person. You're validating that the person about to open this account actually owns that identity. And you're getting that high data integrity. If you're not asking the user, whether they be good users or bad users, if you're not asking the user to input data points and you're deriving them off of an identity assertion, that you have high integrity. If it's a normal user, maybe they're going to type something wrong, and that could lead to problems later on. For instance, I know that certain institutes out there, if you get locked out of your account, one of the only ways, if you're 100% locked out, to reset your access is for them to send you a piece of paper that you have to get notarized. Notarization is just another form of identity verification, because I'm going to have to go verify that I really am who I say I am. Somebody else is going to have to put their seal on it. And you send that back, and they send you a one-time password. Well, let's just say I'm terrible, and I type in my address wrong, and that gets stored some kind of way. Never going to get that mail. Or maybe I do because the post office guessed, or maybe somebody else got it because it was close enough to someone else's address that it went to their address. It wouldn't be very good. The other side on high data integrity is that, if you take a address from a person, let's say that we didn't do identity verification in this manner. Let's say you're like, all right, well, all I really need to do is collect the name, an address, and social security number, and I'm going to do a credit record check, and yep, you exist. Well, you're not really proving that the person who typed all that in actually owned any of that data. You're just proving that they know that data, and we know for a fact that it costs about $4 for you to know that data about someone else. So this kind of gives you the best of both worlds. You have that verified data, but you also have that proof of ownership that they really do own that valid government ID at the end. So bringing it back to our, our identity life cycle and the things that we all talk about, the next place where users, tend to get a lot of friction. And just another anecdotal thing, sorry, on the registration, probably should have brought this up. The number one thing that we have to do right after asking a person all of this is we generally have a reCAPTCHA on the screen because we have to ask them if they're a robot. Well, if you're doing identity verification and you're having them capture a live document, you're asking them if they're human. So you've already covered whether or not they're a robot. So, you can remove some of that friction as well by taking down, that reCAPTCHA step where they're trying to stare at a picture and guess what the letters are inside of it. But moving along in our identity life cycle itself, the next point that users see a lot of friction generally is that forgotten password phrase because, we've got their username and password and eventually they're going to forget their password or maybe we've, as a company, we've stepped things up. We've decided that passwords are boring. No one likes to type them in, and we want more security. So, you as a company, you've decided to roll out stronger authentication where they're going to authenticate maybe using a FIDO flow with some things that are stored on their device, or maybe they're going to use a YubiKey, or maybe they're always going to have to use a push notification. I'm staying away from SMS because we all know the issues that come around there, but dancing around that, maybe it's an SMS. We tend to want to use that for logging because it's easier for users. It's frictionless. It gives us more security than a typical password. But at the end of the day, a user is going to break a device. They're going to lose a password. They're going to if it's a YubiKey, they'll lose a YubiKey, refine their YubiKey. There we go. And typically, what happens here is this is account recovery today. Once you lose that password or you break that device, or something happens to your YubiKey, they get to call your help desk because you're trying to protect their account. Users might not be thinking about it that way. They think about it as, why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? You know what? We're going to make them call the help desk. Maybe you make them fill out KBAs, and we can talk about KBAs all day. Particularly, I kind of find that KBAs have two modes of operandi. You either ask them very easy questions, which a lot of people guess, like what car did you buy in 2017? A lot of people can figure that out. Or you ask them something really hard with those credit questions that they don't know the answer of themselves. And a lot of users get aggravated with that, so they end up calling your help desk. They, like I said, calling on help desk, they don't realize you're trying to protect their account. All they know is they need to look at their account, they need to transfer some money, they need to pay a bill, and they can't get in. So from their side, they see that as a lot of friction. From your side, you're seeing it as, look, we gave you all the frictionless stuff. We gave you all the easy stuff, and somehow you broke it. So this becomes a lot of opportunity for churn. If it's annoying for users or if they get too fed up when they're trying to do something inside of your platform, even though, breaking the phone was their fault or losing the YubiKey was their fault, they don't see it that way. It's going to come back on our side, on the company side. They're not going to like the experience. The other side of it is that because we're trying to keep them safe, this tends to cost a good bit of money. It is not cheap for them to call the help desk. Sometimes, we like to think of it as a help desk cost is like the cost of the person that you're paying to answer the phone, all of the different things that you're doing inside of that phone call, whether it's the transaction cost to do the knowledge-based questions over the phone using some credit databases, or whether it's the cost of some of the other cool software that might be out there that we're lading in there, like calling out to MNO providers, all that stuff, all that risk stuff that we're adding together, trying to get some trust back into it. But we sometimes forget to add in the cost of, just plain aggravation of losing a customer, or what was the customer, how long was they locked out and how many transactions did we miss? If you think about if you have a trading platform and they're locked out for 4 hours, not only can be very mad because they're trying to sell something, but, you guys are taking, I'll pick a number, taking $8 a trade for a normal user. Well, how many trades in between them getting locked out and now are you missing out on? That could be a good many. It might just be one, depending on the users. But at the end of the day, it all boils down to one thing. The longer users locked out, the more aggravated they become, the more option it is for them to churn. And the more it's going to cost the business in the end. But the core of this, the core of making them call that help desk isn't that. We're not trying to do that. We're just trying to keep that integrity high in that account. We're trying to keep that level of assurance high in that account. We spent a lot of time creating that level of assurance with that account, and we want to keep it high. Well, this is where IDV can kind of come in again, where Onfido can come in again. Because one of the things that we allow you to do is you go ahead and, if you wanted to, at any point in time, you can just take a selfie of a user. You can just take that liveness portion. I'll say selfie, but we do have active liveness, which is a video where we make you, we give you a very, very strong spoofing detection to make sure that, it's not kind of some kind of a replay attack. There's things to make sure that the video itself hasn't been pre-recorded inside of it. But you can do a selfie or a video, and then you can take that. And with Onfido, you can match that back with the assertion, with that government ID. So the person who's trying to get in this account right now, who has broken all the nice, frictionless, fast things that we have presented to them to authenticate, is that person sitting in front of that desk the same person who owned the government ID, who owned the original identity assertion that I anchored this account to? So you're getting two things there. You're getting something that's faster than the help desk. You're getting something that's better than your traditional KBAs, especially your credit KBAs, but you're also getting something that is strong enough to keep that level of assurance high in that account. We spend, as companies, we spend a lot of time rolling out behavioral biometrics, rolling out multi-factor authentication, rolling out, YubiKeys, rolling out push notifications, the infrastructure for it. And that's all to keep that account secure. But then we kind of lax, or we kind of fall back in when it comes to being locked out, that account takeover scenario. It's like, well, we got to call the help desk because that's the the fallback for keeping the assurance high. Well, if you added something like IDV, you always have that anchor, that one anchor of that government ID and that face that originally created that account, and you have that anchor of that government ID and that face, if you will, that is trying to do that particular action, trying to get back into that account. Keeps that level of assurance high, keeps that integrity high, it keeps that account secure. And it's a lot better than calling the help desk at the end of the day, because it puts the power back in the user's hands. Now, bringing up the identity lifecycle management, the identity lifecycle again, just to talk about a few other things that can go on in a user's identity lifecycle, and where it becomes very good to kind of add these in, or other use cases that we might not really think about for identity verification, but identity verification would help us plug some holes, or to help us roll out or comply to new regulations that are coming out. So one thing I will talk about is that transaction. We're talking about authorizing high-risk transactions, and you'll have to say you can tell that there's an S there. So this was made by people across the pond, not from Americans. So you'll have to take it with a grain of salt since it's spelled with an S. But on that, when we're talking about authorizing high-risk transactions, I want to make a split between what we're kind of calling a high-risk transaction, because immediately you're like, I don't know what a high-risk transaction is, because when I think high-risk transaction, I say I'm trying to transfer $50 to a friend, and Mickey doesn't normally transfer $50 to his friend, so that's high risk. So we're going to ask him to do, Face ID real quick on his phone. Just one more check real quick to make sure that's really him. Or we're going to send him a one-time passcode, or we're going to send him a push notification just to double-check that's him and that's his phone and that's who's trying to do it, because this is a riskier transaction for Mickey. I do want to say, that's not really what I really mean here. I am splitting the hairs, but bear with me. This is more of the high-risk transactions that are kind of like the detrimental, the end-all transactions, where it's like, what if a person was going to wire transfer, $50,000 out of an account? I'm closing the account, I'm wiring transfer $50,000 out, maybe I'm wire transfer $50,000 in. It just kind of depends on what we're talking about. Those super high-risk transactions, you can add any part of the IDV process, the Onfido IDV process that we've talked about today, whether it be just going ahead and taking the driver's license and the selfie or the liveness check. And then you can take that driver's license and say if it's valid, we'll tell you the information on it. And then you can say, hey, the information on that driver's license match the information inside of my database that I know about the person who opened this account? Yep. Does that face match? Yep. All right. Well, it's very risky, but I've checked to make sure that they actually own this account and that they're authorizing it. Other types of high-risk transactions if you think about it, is things like, imagine, I'm not sure of all the companies that are on here, but I'll give you a anecdotal story. Taxes, W-2s, and we're still in tax season, so it still applies since the U.S. decided to extend tax season to July. But taxes, W-2s. Let's say you got a user and you have a piece of information about that person, their W-2. But the typical risk things that we normally use to protect an account really doesn't apply here because that person logs into this specific site or this specific account once a year. They need their W-2. They're going to log in. They're going to get their W-2. They're going to log out. Some of us kind of treat our savings accounts that way, which is probably good for a lot of users. If you treat your savings account where it's like, hey, it's there, I don't look at it. That's what you're supposed to do with a savings account. And then once a year, I need to pull the report out of it so I get the interest so I can report it to the IRS. A lot of the stuff that we put in SIAM, a lot of the stuff that we put in IAM around risk, is this the same device that I see that person on every year? Is this the same location I see them on every year? A lot of that becomes kind of shaky when you only see that user once a year. For instance, some of us get, we are, I guess I could say I'm a product of my generation. I get a new iPhone every year, for good or for worse. It's what I do, which means that if I only log into a platform once every year, that fingerprint never matches up. Same thing, if I happen to be moving around. If I'm only accessing a platform once a year, maybe because I travel a lot for my job, I'm doing my taxes from a hotel room in San Francisco, and this year I'm going to do my taxes from home because I'm not allowed to go anywhere. That risk data starts to fall apart. You don't have a lot of that history behind that user. You might not even have like a real relationship with them. You have a relationship with their company who put that W-2, that tax information in there, and they're just coming to get it. Well, this is where you get that IDV in again. Think about what I talked about before. You're taking that identity assertion, just happens to be a government ID in this case instead of a SAML assertion or an OpenID Connect token, and we're validating it. We're taking whether or not someone tried to do anything to it, someone tried to manipulate it. And then we're taking to make sure that face matches the face on that ID. Yes, they own this identity assertion. Now you get to take the attributes off of that, especially if it's a driver's license. You get to take the attributes off on that and say, hey, does the address on this, the physical address for this person, match the address for this tax information that I'm about to release? Does the name and date of birth for this person match the name and date of birth for these tax records that I'm about to release to this person? And at the end of the day, you might still need to collect that Social Security number, but at least now you're only trusting the user to enter in one thing. Everything else is actually coming with an anchor behind it, a verification behind it, a risk, a mitigated risk attached to it because Onfido has validated that government ID. And at the end of the day, when we're talking about rolling out new regulations, and I'm going to go very fast here, but the same type of thing happens when you're talking about CCPA and GDPR. Let's say you don't have a direct relationship with a customer, but an end user can still go to you and say, hey, I want you to forget everything you know about me. Well, you don't have an account to prove that you own the account to say that you want to leave me. You just think, or maybe that I have information about you and you need to get this information gone. Well, that's another place where identity verification can kick in. You're getting some certified, you're getting some verified attributes about that identity, about that user, and whether or not the person initiating the transaction owns the identity. And then you can use those verified attributes to go through your databases and find the information that you need to give to that person for their right to view or their right to rectify or their right to be forgotten. So, again, at the end of the day, we're about anchoring digital accounts in real identity using an identity assertion, a government ID, and a person's biometrics, their face. Do they actually own this? And it's better for your users. It's better for your business. It comes in the three choices. We're going back to the beginning. The experience engine, the UX, the design, the autofill, that's all about that speed because we know it's got to be fast, it's got to be frictionless, or you're not going to convince the business to put it in front to protect the fraud. You got that security engine that's all about protecting that fraud, and then you're feeding this information into some of our partnerships. We have published partnerships with a lot of IAM software out here. This is just a few of them. There are a few more that aren't listed here, but we have those published partnerships with them. So all of that data flows seamlessly into the things that you're using to protect your APIs, into the things that you're using to protect your applications so that you're getting that all-around security, and you can use these platforms to enforce that security on what actions users can and can't do based on if they pass verification in the past or if they're passing verification right now to complete that action. So I'm going to thank you for that, and I'll turn it back over to Robert.
Thank you, Mickey. Yeah, let me just kind of wind up here real quickly. Sorry about that. And get back here. There's a little bit of the commercial, and I'm gonna do this pretty quickly so we can address some questions we've got coming in. First off, what is it about identity verification on Fido that stands us apart? One is that inclusive user experience. That this is both about how do you drive great UX user experience with also in meeting business goals and ambitions. Our machine learning, a lot of companies will take AI, third-party AI, bolt it on as kind of to meet the market demands of I need to have artificial intelligence and machine learning. Ours was purpose-built from the very beginning. That's how we started. We're not bolting on a bunch of third-party products and then creating this solution. It's our own innovation and IP, and you'll see in a second that we're very proud of that and being recognized for that. And the thing that we didn't really show here is some of the dashboarding capabilities and analytics that will allow your teams to really look at real-time tracking and analytics to make smart security onboarding decisions. Some of our customers highlighted some of these, the fintechs and kind of challenger and neobanks that we've had a lot of success with. In addition, and the only reason some of the big names are not on here is just issues of being able to publicize them. We can certainly talk about it as we talk one-on-one about more traditional financial institutions that are using our products as well. But we are, I'd say we're the market leader certainly in challenger banks using that are completely digital from the beginning and using our technology for identity verification. We're also the infrastructure behind Clear, and actually for Clear, those in the U.S. obviously are familiar with Clear from its airport access, getting through security. Basically, I call it the line cutting service. Clear is also expanding that into when we all go back into how do we connect, how do we get into stadiums, arenas, et cetera. Clear is also going to do some access, physical access, and actually connecting back to potentially immunity certification using our technology. As Clear expands, you're going to see them showing up more with remote devices, and so they're going to be showing up with cell phones, et cetera, to do that Clear process. It's our technology behind that. Like we said, some of the awards that we win, and one we're most proud is Barclays last year, and they named us their Innovation Supplier of the Year for some of the things we've done for them. So with that, I'm going to close. Thank you. We've got about 10 minutes here. I know we've got a number of questions that are coming in. If you have any, please, in the question on the console, type in a question, and we'll try to get to them. But I'll turn this back over to Mike. And Mike, if you want to throw out some of the questions that are being asked.
Excellent. Thank you, Robert. I will do just that. And as Robert just said, if you've got something on your mind, now is definitely the time to get that question into the queue. But we've got some good ones here already, so let's just hop right in. How can you be sure the selfie picture received is actually being provided by the true person?
So I'm going to take a little liberty on this because what I'm guessing you're pointing at is things like, if it's a selfie, what if they just downloaded it from Facebook and fed that through fake webcam software? So one of the things that we do on our back end is we actually look for if there's any metadata attached to it, make sure it's not from a fake webcam that's being loaded in. We're also doing some simple checks like, when was the date of this photo actually created versus the date that it was uploaded versus the date that you created the check. And that's the simple, easy stuff. The more complex stuff that goes into it is that when we're taking a selfie, one of the things we do is we actually the user doesn't realize it because they're taking the selfie once. We actually take frames on the left and right of that, if you will. The before and after is when the user takes the button, and we're looking for changes in that. If all of those are exactly the same, then the user's not providing a live, if you will, photo of themselves. And I can talk deeper into it if you want to reach out to us and have a direct conversation, but I figured that would be the quick and easy ones to tell you guys about.
Excellent. Thank you, Mickey. And, okay, next question here. does the similarity score represent probability?
The similarity score by itself that we return is a similarity score. It is the probability, anecdotally, it can be a probability that is the same person, but it is a similarity score. How similar are these two together? One of the things that we have to look at Onfido, which is different than biometrics that are matching selfie to selfies, is that, when you're doing a selfie to selfie match in the biometric world, you want 0.999. That's the theoretical. You want the 1, but you're not going to get a 1. You want the 0.999. In the selfie, the biometric world, if you will, to government ID, if we got a score that high, high probability it's the same person, low probability that this isn't fraudulent because no one looks like they do on their driver's license. There's got to be, there's got to be a difference in similarity for the probability that it is the person and it's not fraudulent to be high.
Thank you. Right. Okay. Next question here. How do you handle government IDs that expire and the account owner has a new ID?
Yeah, so from our side, just to give you a quick overview of what an Onfido report looks like. When Onfido is going through and we're checking a driver's license or a government ID to tell you whether or not it's valid, we don't just send you, we'll have a result, if you will, and it'll say clear, it'll say suspect, it'll say rejected, or it'll say consider. So under that, though, we actually do return back right around 25, 26 different flags on that ID itself. So in this case, let's say that a user submitted an expired ID. What we would tell you the report would look like is a caution, and then under document expiration, we would tell you that, hey, that document's expired. But you would actually be able to see whether programmatically or physically by looking at the report that, hey, it's expired, but the user's not, they're not suspected fraudulent. They didn't change anything on the driver's license. They didn't falsify this driver's license. They didn't, put a hologram on it or swap out the faces. We're just telling you that, the guy just happens to have an expired driver's license. That expiration would actually come back in the report, in the stuff that we feed back to your system through the APIs. And what you would be able to do is create something inside of your identity software that just, whenever you want a person to re-trigger that identity verification, you would say, oh, if your past expiration date, set a rule that the person has to trigger identity verification, and you could push them through our flow again, and then we would tell you if the new ID is valid, and then your identity software, which is integrated, would be able to take that and store that the user is now been re-verified, if you will, with a new driver's license, and here's their new expiration date.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. All right, and I want to thank everyone in the audience, too. Lots of great questions coming in. All right, next one. How do you support people with disabilities such as impaired vision?
So Onfido, our SDKs, we actually go through a lot of processes and a lot of third-party checking to make sure that we meet accessibility standards. And that's something, if you guys reach out to us directly, I can actually provide that report to you. But we do have our accessibility standards. We do have our, our qualifications, and I can send you those certifications with that, along with the process and the company that we work with to make sure that we are being inclusive.
Great, thank you. All right, here's a question, a little bit of a follow-up to one you just answered a moment ago. If a bad actor creates a fake ID, such as their photo, such as real driver's license, then the live photo and the ID will match. So the question is, what do you do to validate that the government ID was correct in the first place?
So with the time that we have left, I'm going to give you a super quick answer, and I would definitely recommend that you reach out so I can answer this deeper. But that's part of the algorithms, machine learning algorithms that we run on the driver's license. One in particularly, if you look up on our website, would be called picture face integrity, where we are checking to make sure, specifically around the picture. Now, this goes over the entire driver's license, but specifically, high scrutiny around the picture itself to make sure there is no pixel manipulation, to make sure that everything lines up the way it's supposed to make sure that someone didn't, try to Photoshop a picture on top of another picture. Like I said, that does go over the whole driver's license, and it goes down to even the fonts. We even check the fonts themselves on the driver's license to make sure that they're real fonts, but specifically for the picture, you'd be looking for what we call our picture face integrity algorithms.
Excellent. All right. And that, I think, is a good note to wrap things up on. We're right here just about at the top of the hour, and we always try to bring in these programs as close to on schedule as possible, knowing that so many of our audience members are rushing off to something else at the top of the hour. So let me, first of all, thank Robert and Mickey both. Great discussion here. Really appreciate you walking us through all this great technology here. Really interesting stuff. And everyone in the audience, really glad that you could join us today. Thank you for participating in those polls early on, and of course for all these great questions that you've asked during the Q&A. And please keep an eye out on your inbox, because we will be sending you a follow-up email in the next day or two that will have a link to a recording of this event, and you can kind of listen to the highlights at your leisure in the future, and we encourage you to do that. And with that, I think I will officially wrap it up. Wish everyone a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope you'll join us again here very soon. Thanks so much.